Okay, I'm going to start really with other questions other than George Galloway. I'll get on to George Galloway and the Workers' Party very quickly, just to say that this election campaign, from a Tory point of view, has been, a disaster. I mean, if we look at the launch, it was in Rishi Sunak's remit to time it and to plan it. Good God, begins with a downpour. Can you blame him for that? Well, yes, because you could have had it indoors like the Labour Party. Either way, the latest one, of course, is boring. Bet gate. Everything's gate. Soon you'll have a generation that doesn't know what gate is other than scandal. It will just become synonymous with the word. Either way, what do the polls show? Labour 41%. This is from last night. Labour 41%, margin of error between 36 and 46. Tories 20%, margin of error 15 to 25. Reform 17%, margin of error 14 to 20 points. Lib Dems 11 points, margin of error between 8 and 14. And hey, most of the press, most of the media has been dominated by polls. And the real question is, from their point of view, how big is the Labour majority? I don't know what a super majority is, but could it be a super majority? And will the Tories have the biggest drubbing in their entire history? Of course, we don't know. Polls will change. I have to say my own expectation, and I could still be not proved right, it's not a question of that, but my own expectation was in the course of the campaign would see a bleed of reform votes towards the Tories. It's a first past the post. It is about government. No one thinks that reform is just about to establish itself in government. But Nigel Farage throwing his hat in the ring has certainly changed things in the short term. In other words, not only have we seen reforms vote, or should I say polling ratings, firm up, if anything, we've seen reform actually eating in to the Tories. So although you've seen, I think the latest polls show a dip, a little dip for the Labour Party, a little dip for the Tories, what we're still talking about is two parties dominating Parliament, or should I say the House of Commons, on July the 5th. And the real question that seems to be in front of us in terms of speculation is, how big, how crushing will the Keir Starmer majority be? 2 points. First of all, it is worth mentioning, and that is donations. Over the course of the general election campaign so far, Labour Party's taken in £4.4 million. By contrast, the Tories are on 290,000. And all you need to do is look at the donations, and what it shows you is that it's the capitalist class, it's rich people that are making the donations. It's not ordinary people with their pennies and pounds that are, financing the campaign on either side. And I think legitimately that has led some comrades on the left to question our designation of the Labour Party remaining a bourgeois workers' party. After all, what we haven't had stories of, no surprise, is, for example, of Unite throwing money at the Labour Party, as it certainly did under McCluskey in 2016 2017 and 2019. I mean, has Unite made any donations to the general election campaign? Certainly Sharon Graham has refused to even endorse the Labour manifesto, and she's done it on the basis, this is my understanding of it, one, over the question of 0-hour contracts and all the rest of it, and secondly, North Sea gas and oil concessions. Make of that what you will. It's certainly, as I said, legitimate, therefore, to question the nature of the Labour Party. All I would say from my angle is I don't see any fundamental change in the nature of the Labour Party. Remember, in terms of politics, the emphasis is on the bourgeois, and that, from our angle, remember, also applies to the trade unions. The trade unions, with no exceptions that I can think of in Britain, are engaged in the bourgeois politics or the bourgeois economics of the working class. So in that sense, what we're looking at when it comes to the working class side of it is, yes, trade unions are organizations of masses of workers, and the history of the Labour Party mainly getting its vote from working class people, and certainly having a background in the working class movement in Britain. That's what the working class bit of it stands for. Second point is there's quite a lot of complaint in the media, in the press, that coverage of the general election thus far, and I suspect it will remain so, is dominated by what I began with, and that's the polls. So there's talk from some, we should ban polls during an election campaign. We should only have polls for the first week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or whatever it is of a general election campaign. We should ban polls in the last few days, whatever. My own argument here would be, I'm not proposing myself any ban on polls, but the reality is, why is it being dominated by the polls? And that's because politically, when it comes to the difference between what the three main parties, perhaps the four main parties, what actually separates them? You know, what is the difference between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer? Politically, what we've seen with Keir Starmer and the Labour Party is this strategy of triangulation, of where they get absolutely right up to where the Tory party is. You leave a gap, but I think, in the words coined by Dennis Skinner, fiery left winger, the difference is, inseparable, except for the width of a cigarette paper. And I think, therefore, what we have is largely artificial debate. I was looking at the Sun from the other day to see if our prediction, or the prediction of Paul Damate, was confirmed. And the Sun, when Murdoch gets back from honeymoon, he'll change the line of the Sun. No sign of that so far. The article I read in the Sun was 11 days to save Britain. This is a result of an interview with Rishi Sunak. And apparently, if you believe it, of course, anybody believes it, is an idiot. I don't think the majority of voters or Sun readers are idiots, shouldn't treat them as such. But according to Rishi Sunak, the Labour Party is just about to open the gates. It believes in the free movement of people. Apparently, it's going to make Britain defenceless, in terms of world politics. And it's going to have asylum seekers wandering around Britain with not a care in the world. That's the sort of picture that Rishi Sunak paints. The reality is, I think, a little bit more humdrum, and that is the difference between the Labour Party and the Tory party is a matter of detail. That's what we're talking about. And if anything, what you can say in terms of the Labour Party, what they're promising to be is to be different. to be slightly more rational. And that's what their junking of the Rwanda plan is all about, in my opinion. Okay, let's move on to the other non-story that's the story in the media. Nigel Farage repeating his warning. I think he first came up with this in 2014. This would be when Russia annexed the Crimea. And he said, look, the blame for Russia's behavior is the EU, which he hates, obviously, and NATO, which I'm not sure he hates, but I presume he'll have a slightly Trumpian view of it. Either way, the expansion of what, for shorthand, we can call the West into the East, this is going to cause a reaction, and it's going to cause a negative reaction that could go against our interests here in Little Blighty. So he's dared to repeat that. And what you've got is the predictable reaction from the mainstream parties, the Lib Dems, the Tories, the Labour Party. Here you are, here's the Guardian. This is a quote, this is the headline: Nigel Farage's defense of Putin's war. It's not what I heard. That's not what I heard. What he said is there's a reason for this war. Okay, that doesn't chime with the idea that Putin is mad or just bad or just dangerous to know. No, there's a rationality in terms of Putin's war. What exactly his war aims were, I don't know, but you could say stopping Ukraine joining NATO, neutralizing Ukraine, and maybe doing some deal over the Donbass and other areas where there's a large ethnic Russian Ukrainian presence. In other words, in the south, crucially in Crimea, but also in the east in Donbass. Just a little footnote on that. With the AWL, it sort of doesn't surprise me, the Alliance for Workers' Liberty, that it's urging a vote across the board for all Labour candidates. That includes in Islington North, where the polls show Corbyn running neck and neck with the official Labour candidate at the moment. Polls also show George Galloway in with a good chance in Rochdale. So that's interesting. But if you look at the AWL, why does it want across the board vote for Labour? Well, my suspicion is it's a combination of the idea of a crisis of expectations. So you get a lot of nonsense in the press. I'm talking about the left-wing press now, about some sort of crisis of strikes and all the rest of it. That excuses them voting Labour. On the other hand, Socialist Worker is quite rightly saying that Labour's working hand in glove with the trade union bureaucracy to ensure that that doesn't happen. And you can believe whichever version of events that you like. Either way, I would suggest that there's another reason for the AWL opting for Labour across the board. And that is because candidates such as George Galloway and Jeremy Corbyn at least take a view that they aren't gung-ho for what we've called, and I think it is the right take on this one, a NATO proxy war in Ukraine. That doesn't mean that we support Putin. We don't. But we do see NATO pursuing its strategy of seeing down Russia as part of a grand plan to stop the rise of China. That's our analysis. So the AWL, being first campist, being pro-imperialist, I understand why they would reject voting for George Galloway, for Corbyn and other candidates from left-wing organizations and independence and all the rest of it. So it's pro-imperialism that at least provides some of the explanation to it. And I'd make the same point, one about a crisis of expectations, but two, about Ukraine and NATO and the proxy war there with workers' power. They're calling for across the board vote for Labour. I've known comrades in workers' power for a long time. I think the personnel has radically changed since I first came across the comrades way back in the 1980s, where we had a lot in common in the middle of the miners' strike. But I've seen them flip-flop when it comes to voting. We were with them in the Socialist Alliance, but then I saw them flip over into anarchism and urging people not to vote for any candidate. And now we see, under a new leadership, under a pro-NATO war leadership, them flipping into vote Labour across the board. All you can say about the AWL is that they've been equally as inconsistent as workers' power, but they've been a lot more consistent in their pro-imperialism. Two last points before moving on to George Galloway and the Workers' Party. Lebanon, in spite of what we would guess, Iran's leadership doing its best to hold Hezbollah back, tensions mount, and there's a lot of talk, in media circles, not least in Israel, about opening a second front, i.e. not only fighting a war in Gaza, a completely unequal war, it needs to be stressed, but opening a second front in Lebanon. And we're told that Hezbollah is a far more effective military force than Israel. We should take that carefully. Depending on what sort of war Israel either wants to fight or is forced to fight, there's no doubt that Israel is the superpower in the region, and Hezbollah isn't even a state power, it's a semi-state power. Either way, again, although it's, as I said, a much more potent force militarily than Hamas, this would be another grossly unequal war. That doesn't stop necessarily Israel getting a bloody nose. Okay, France looks like, in terms of the polls, that the first round of the assembly elections, I think that's at the end of this month, will produce you National Rally first, New Popular Front second, Macron's alliance with Renaissance at its heart third. And we would expect that sort of result also to be repeated in the second round of the assembly elections. And therefore we would expect, after the second round, some sort of cohabitation deal between Jordan Baralella and National Rally and Macron. In other words, you wouldn't have a National Rally majority in the assembly, but that would be the biggest party. And what you'd have is a working relationship, some sort of working relationship between National Rally and the centre. And already what's happening is that big business has been on something of a rapprochement exercise with National Rally. And you've had National Rally, for example, retreating from its previous commitment to withdraw France from NATO, something that you had under de Gaulle. France was semi-attached to NATO, or semi-detached from NATO, call it what you will. So they backtracked on that one. Nonetheless, what we've had is the markets in France somewhat spooked, and as a result of that, London, the city of London, is once again the preeminent financial center in Europe, which of course itself, its fall from that was triggered by Brexit. So it shows you the fluidity of finance capital, how easily it can move, how easily it is spooked. Okay, let's get on to the official title of the meeting, which is the Workers' Party, George Galloway, and a critique. Well, to do that, what I want to do is take comrades back. I'm not going to give you a blow by blow, by the way. I want to take comrades back to the founding conference, not of the Workers' Party, but the founding conference of Arthur Scargill's Socialist Labour Party. And there on the door of Camden Centre in London, you had these guys from FISC, the Fourth International Supporters Caucus. These were the bag carriers. These were the bureaucrats. These were Arthur Scargill's enforcers. And what happened in the course of the SLP, namely over the dispute over the black questions, is Arthur got rid of these courtiers, gave them the push, and brought in one as a vice president, one Roy Bull, a barking ex-member of Jerry Healy's WRP, and also what he brought on to the leadership was one Harpal Brar. And Harpal Brar was elevated to the very top of the SLP. I have to say, with Harpal, he's quite a charming individual, and I know that in terms of our comrades, he didn't unleash a witch hunt against our comrades. Indeed, I can remember a particular incident where he held his son, Ranjit Brar, back from fingering our comrades. Anyway, to cut a long story short, he fell out with Arthur Scargill. He denounced Arthur Scargill of being nothing but a reformist running dog, and he formed the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist, Leninist. Now, what should be stressed with Harpal Brar and the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist, Leninist, is this was not a Maoist party. Harpal Brar is a Stalinist. I remember Harpal not only because of the SLP, but because way back when I was getting into politics, it was the only place in Britain, that's Harpal Brar's publishing concern, that you could get copies of J.V. Stalin. And I used to send my money away to 32 Newell Road, Hemel Hempstead, Herts, to get my copy of Foundations of Leninism, or whatever Harpal Brar was publishing. So he wasn't of the little red book Cultural Revolution sort. He was of the anti-revisionist, upholding Stalin school of thought. And the reason why I'm stressing that is because through one channel or another, Harpal and his son and daughter, that's Ranjit and Jyoti, end up forming the Workers' Party of Britain alongside George Galloway. And that's clearly the case. George Galloway was elected the leader of the Workers' Party at their founding conference, but Jyoti was elected vice leader of the Workers' Party. And it wasn't just a question of a particular position. If you read their foundational documents, the fingerprints of the Brar family were all over it. So you have glowing references to the achievements of socialism in the Soviet Union and in China and in the Democratic Republic of Korea and other such formulations. Okay, I looked up the Communist Party of Great Britain Marxist-Leninist website and did a search, and Workers' Party of Britain, and I came up with one article, and this is a Congress resolution where they are clearly backing the Workers' Party as a project, but it's introduced with a health warning. And it's introduced by saying, well, that was then. That was at 2019 or whatever the particular date happened to be. We haven't changed since then, but the Workers' Party has changed. And instead of being a broad party of where communists would be free to work, it's now just another electoral outfit pushing reformism. And we don't want anything to do with that. And it has to be said, at least my impression of the Communist Party of Great Britain is it's a much reduced, not that it was ever anything much to write home about, but clearly it's undergone a collapse with its experience, both in the Workers' Party, where I expect it rose, but then coming out of where I expect it fell. Either way, you have sort of residual elements of that sort of politics in the current Workers' Party, because we shouldn't forget that in terms of this marriage between the CPGB-ML, for short, the Browrites, and George Galloway, this was a marriage of Stalinists. But whereas Harpel Bra could tell you all about what one dead Russian said to another Russian on a wet Wednesday afternoon in whenever the hell it happens to be, George Galloway either doesn't want to go there or has never gone there. So if we look at George Galloway in his book, what was it? Imagine, was it Imagine? Anyway, some John Lennon quote, I think it was Imagine. Either way, if you look at his book, he famously says in it that the collapse of the Soviet Union, 1991, was the worst day in my life. And I believe that when it comes to politics. His other book, I think, is about Cuba, and you can see where he's at. You know, he's a sort of third worldy, pro-Stalin, pro-Soviet Union guy, but he mixes that with how should I put it, a canny ability to listen, in particular to the Muslim community in Britain. He's got a very finely tuned ear when it comes to that particular population. He mixes that with his own social conservatism and his own Catholic religion. Now, the SWP, for example, say back in the day when we were with George Galloway in respect, you had the fiery anti-war, anti-imperialist George Galloway. Now look at him. You know, he's anti-migrant. He's questioning trans rights. No, there's one George Galloway. And if you look at the SWP, when they were with George Galloway, when they were chummy, what you had is the SWP providing voting fodder to defeat motions such as free movement of people, a woman's right to choose an abortion, republicanism, because as the SWP speaker said at the Respect conference, if you stand for republicanism, that will put off royalist voters. I expect it would. It would also maybe put off royals, but then they don't have the vote, do they? Okay. Either way, if we look at the program that the Workers' Party is standing on for July the 4th, it's a pretty strange, eclectic mix. Should be added that it's standing in a lot of places. It is the leading organization on the left, leaves the Tusk coalition way behind. So I'm not sure exactly how many, but it's something around 150, 152, maybe 154 candidates. I haven't gone out to, okay, whatever it is, it's somewhere up there in that sort of ballpark, Bob. And it's standing, yeah, in an awful lot of places, therefore. So you're not automatically going to have a Workers' Party candidate, but there's a pretty good chance that you will, because most of us, I would guess here, live in cities we live in working class towns, we live in working class areas, and that's where, in general, the Workers' Party would be expected to stand candidates. Okay, so what do we have? 10-point program. This is the sort of short version. You sort of skim down it. My shoulders go up and down. I go, yeah. Nothing exceptional there. But it is worthwhile pointing out that even when you just read the 10-point program, you already come across phrases like rebuild British industry. We have stuff about ending the domination of the economy by finance. Yeah, okay, that's worth noting. I'm just saying that as a pointer of what is to come. When we get into the manifesto itself, there's a stress on wealth redistribution. So I'm sort of reminded of what was his name? Yeah, that's right. Not Dennis Skinner, but Dennis Healey, the former communist right-wing Labour chancellor, who famously got up at a Labour Party conference and talked about squeezing the rich until the pips squeal. That's the sort of phraseology I think would easily come out of the mouth of George Galloway. Note, in terms of that, redistribution of wealth. Sure, that doesn't mean abolishing capital. That doesn't mean overcoming wage slavery. Indeed, you could make the argument that what you do under those circumstances, if wealth is being redistributed from the centers of capital to the mass of the population, such a regime itself becomes dependent on the generation of that wealth, either by private capital or nationalized capital. That's an important point. So in other words, what we're talking about is a redistributive form of capitalism, of where trickle down becomes a reality rather than a phrase. And I'm not saying that's practically possible, but this is the promise that we get in the manifesto. That goes hand in hand with talk of workers' control. Great stuff. Except the example that we get from the Workers' Party of workers' control is not taken, from something like 1917 in Russia, when the workers literally ran production. They were the management. They didn't work out very well, but we'll leave that one aside for the moment. No, what they have in mind is the example, and this is the example that's quoted, is France and above all Germany. And in Germany, of course, what you have isn't workers' control. You have workers' consultation. You have a supervisory board of where workers and management, and I am not sure who else sits, but workers basically are there. The representatives are there to be bribed by management. That's the reality. They're taken on all sorts of freebies. They are, taken out to the flesh pots of wherever. That's what they're recommending. So we're not really talking about workers' control. We're talking about a gesture in that direction. And as I said, the giveaway to me is the example of Germany. I didn't know about France, but apparently have something similarish in France. Okay, what else do we have? Global warming and all that sort of stuff. Well, they're against ULEZ, i.e. the ultra low emission zone that we now have in London, because this discriminates, as it does, against poorer people who can afford to drive or must drive for a living. And that's absolutely true. So if we take London, when Ken Livingstone, for example, introduced traffic charging, I was very dubious at the time. Is this going to work? Is it going to lead to gridlock? I was pleasantly surprised that it didn't. He had introduced, by the way, a huge number of buses, cheap transport. Nonetheless, the fact of the matter is, if I was a millionaire, or nowadays a billionaire, and I wanted to travel into central London, one, I'd be going very slowly. It's really is a horrible place to go to on the roads, but I could do it. I could sit there in my Rolls Royce, driven there by my chauffeur, and I'd arrive. And who cares what the hell they charge me to come into central London? On the other hand, your poor bugger who has to, work for a living, that's a different matter. Either way, the Workers' Party is against ULEZ. Meanwhile, the likes of me, I have to breathe the air. I have to breathe the diesel and the petrol and the particulates that these vehicles let out. And not only the particulates from fuel, one of the biggest sources of, lung diseases for us Londoners is breathing in the tires. Little bits of either rubber or whatever, rubberized, whatever the hell is burnt off tires as cars brake and accelerate and all the rest of it. We have to breathe in that stuff. So what the Workers' Party is saying is that they oppose that. And that goes hand in hand with what I would describe and what mainstream opinion would describe, or maybe I wouldn't know. Let's scrap that one. It goes hand in hand with what used to be described as climate skepticism, which in reality is climate denialism. Now, that doesn't mean, as the Workers' Party manifesto says, they're well aware, as anybody who's gone to school is aware, that the climate changes. And it talks about climate changing over thousands of years. Well, it also changes over millions of years, and indeed, given the age of the Earth, over billions of years. We all know that. But no, what they want to do is say, when it comes to zero carbon, which is balancing off between what you let out and what trees and all the rest of it absorb, when we get to equilibrium, that should be something that's decided by public debate and a referendum. And so what they want is to have this open debate about the question, and they want to be guided by science. Well, the science, as far as I know, is pretty unanimous. Global warming is, of course, happening. The main cause of it is human activity. And me as a left-winger, I would say that the main cause of that isn't simply human activity, it's production for the sake of production, or in our society, production for the sake of profit. The reason why I keep in production for the sake of production isn't just to quote Charlie Marx, it's also because of the experience of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was a polluter, a despoiler of nature, a miner, extracting wealth from the soil in a way that was equivalent to capitalism, but it wasn't driven by profit. It was driven, precisely in the words of Mikhail Gorbachev, it was driven production for the sake of production. And what we know from scientists is that the quicker we stop doing this, the better. And all you need to do, okay, I know it's in this week's news, and, you want to be careful about the weather and equating that with climate. The two aren't the same. They're related, but they're not the same. But look at the death toll in Saudi Arabia. Over 1,000 people died from heat. And we have that increasingly common in the tropics. So that is undeniable. What we have is stories of British tourists, so, European tourists in Greece overcome with heat stroke. That's increasingly the pattern. So the idea that you put it off, put it off, put it off, and you put it to a referendum. Well, we're against referendum. We think that this should be decided by an elected body where you negotiate, you bargain between competing needs, and you look at compensation for this section of the population. You look at who will pay the main cost, etc., etc. That cannot be done in a yes/no referendum. Life is far too complex, and certainly when it comes to zero carbon, net, and other such questions, you can't deal with it, I think at least, with a yes or no question. Okay, Workers' Party, working class representation throughout the Bank of England. What the hell does that mean? I think it means the same thing as workers' control over industry with some consultation board. The fact of the matter is that working class representation in the Bank of England is in irrelevance. What is important there, surely, is bringing the Bank of England under democratic control, which was something, remember, that was Gordon Brown did, made the Bank of England independent from the government and therefore dependent on the markets. We want to bring that under democratic control. That should be the slogan, not nonsense about workers' representation. To use a phrase, we want the bakery. That's our aim. Okay, let's just move on in terms of other notable elements of the Workers' Party programme. The police. We are told that the police should remain, and I presume that George Galloway isn't that well read. Very good when it comes to rhetoric. George Galloway's brilliant when it comes to, you know, parliamentary type performances from a platform. But I think his knowledge of history is questionable. At least I'm going to question it, because what it says in the manifesto is that we need to redirect the police force. We need to redirect it to street crime. We need to redirect it against antisocial behavior on estates and in the community. And the police should act in the spirit of the Peelers, of Robert Peel, the founder of the Metropolitan Police. When I read that, I went, George, don't you know how the Chartist movement, the radical movement in England, reacted to the formation of the Peelers? They saw it for what it was. And that is a lot more effective anti-working class force than the local yeomanry. Remember, that cut down people at Peterloo by using truncheons, using a professional force of bullies that were recruited for that purpose. This was against the working class. This wasn't something that was policing with the consent of the population. This was policing against the radical section of the population. We're also told that gang crime, and that includes, you know, arms and also knives, this is the responsibility of sociopaths. See, apparently what you get, because the Workers' Party isn't a bunch of willy liberals, we recognize that some people are irreformable. I personally don't accept that. I mean, maybe someone is so disturbed, so damaged, maybe they are unchangeable. But I take my inspiration, at least not from the historic fact, I don't know enough about it, but I take my inspiration from the film called The Last Emperor. I don't know if anyone's seen it. It's about the last emperor of China and how the Reds forced him to tie his own shoelaces, how they forced him to become a proper human being. And I know, you know, in terms of the history of the last emperor, not from the film, but from the man, that he spent his last days. This is how I want to treat King Charles III, by the way. They let him be a gardener in the grounds of the Forbidden City in Beijing. I think that's how Charles III should end his days, being a gardener in the public space of Buckingham Palace. And occasionally would go along there, admiring the building, looking at the dandelions and the roses, and would see some old man talking to the plants, and someone would point out, oh, by the way, that's Charles Windsor. That's how that's the sort of rehabilitation I believe in. So if someone like the last emperor of China can be rehabilitated, I'm convinced that Charles Windsor can be rehabilitated so becomes a fit and proper human being. But according to the Workers' Party, some people are so sick that they have to be locked up. And these people are the ones that are responsible for people smuggling and for gang culture. And so we're going to lock them up, and that will show them, won't it? So instead of explaining these things due to social circumstances, such as the completely misguided war on drugs, not mentioned, what we get is it's in the head. It's to do with scrambled brains. As I said, I'm more than skeptical about that. The other big question that features quite rightly is Palestine. Dig into the detail, though. Of course, it stands for a one-state solution. You would expect it to do so, wouldn't you? That's conventional left-wing thinking. Okay, leave aside spew, leave aside the CPB. Okay, but what it says is that Palestine should be available. This should be the state, the one-state solution should be available for all those who were actually born in Palestine. And what it means by that is mandate Palestine. So the West Bank, Gaza, but also what I would call shorthand Israel proper. But that means a big slice, not the majority, but a big slice of the Israeli Hebrew population wasn't born in Palestine. They were born in Russia, for example, or Poland, or Ukraine, or New York. And what happens to the children of these people? Are these people meant to return to Russia, to Ukraine, to Poland, to New York? Do they have to take their children with them? I find that highly problematic. It's why I'm convinced, certainly, that we need a different approach when it comes to Palestine. We actually need a strategy, whether it works or not, but we certainly need a strategy that's designed to win a majority of Hebrew people, crucially the working class, over to a democratic solution, which in our opinion, at least, has to be a socialist solution. So it has to be led by the working class, but led by the working class in the Middle East, crucially carrying out a program of national reunification of the Arab-speaking mass along the lines of the unity of Germany and Italy in the 19th century. So this isn't about discriminating against minorities such as Kurds or Berbers, but it does recognize an Arab nation, as Marx recognized a German nation, and Marxists and radicals recognized an Italian nation, before the unification of that country. George wants out of NATO. 3 cheers for George. He talks about trade union bureaucrats, and the problem with trade union bureaucrats is that they are tied to the Labour Party, and the biggest enemy of the Workers' Party is the Labour Party. That's what makes the trade union bureaucracy problematic. So it's not the Tories, it's not the Lib Dems, it's not capitalism that's the biggest enemy of the Workers' Party. It's this damned Labour Party. That has to be got rid of. That has to be replaced. So you get a little sniff, at least, of what we would call, for the sake of, how should I put it, colouring our description, a little bit of third periodism there. There's no, I mean, while maybe, they're not standing, against Diane Abbott and Jeremy Corbyn, thank God. But you do get the impression that if Jeremy was standing as a Labour candidate, they would oppose him. That's the impression you get. And I think quite rightly, that's the impression you would get. You don't get an understanding, any sort of understanding that the Labour Party is a bourgeois workers' party. What about the trade unions? What about using the trade unions to get representation at Labour Party conference? Okay, a talking shop in the main, but nothing about that. So what we get is, again, I think, George sort of being coloured by the Stalinism of the Browrites. This was their take on the Labour Party. The Labour Party is just an imperialist party. J.V. Stalin was right in the early 30s, and maybe, I don't know, I've not read enough, maybe there's nothing to read, that if you look at Harpal Brau's writings, maybe Georgy Dimitrov gets the blame for the shift to popular frontism, and Stalin is somehow let off the hook. I don't know. It wouldn't be impossible with Harpal to imagine such a thing. Again, another interesting formulation. Is this about respectability? The Workers' Party supports lawful strikes. Well, sorry, George. Some of the best times of my life have been looking and supporting unlawful strikes. Remember the miners' strike and how headquarters were seized? I remember we had a team of comrades that was sent to South Wales in the miners' strike when the police came along to seize their headquarters. I certainly remember when I was young going outside Pentonville jail when there were 5 dockers locked up. I have to admit that I watched them being released on television. I wasn't there, but I was at the demonstrations outside the prison. I was part of, the Communist Party branch, along with a lot of other left-wing comrades in Hemel Hempstead, the town where I cut my political teeth, seeing workers on building sites, on factories and offices come out in support of the dockers. I can remember the TUC threatening a one-day general strike if they were released. Their strike was unlawful. No one disputes the unlawful nature. They courted martyrdom in order to test this law. And after the Pentonville Five were released, the law became inoperable. That's just the fact of the matter. And nowadays, effective trade unionism, if it was going to be effective, actually does require breaking the law, because the reason why strikes haven't been effective is, one, because they've been short, but because solidarity strikes are illegal. We need solidarity strikes with the forthcoming strike by the junior doctors. That's what we need. We can't expect them to win on the basis of killing us, that so many people died today because we didn't treat them. That's not how we want the junior doctors to win, and they don't want to win that way as well. But what happens, if large sections of the working class came out on strike with them, profitable sectors of the economy? That is a winning formula, but that is illegal. So what's this talk of lawful strike action? According to the manifesto, quite right, Corbynism was unintentionally designed to fail. Lovely phrase, I like it. And it says that Corbyn was such a naive that he didn't, calculate for the reaction of foreign powers. And what it means by that is obvious. You don't even need to state it. So I'm not criticizing for not naming the United States, the CIA, and all the rest of it. But they didn't need to do it, because as the manifesto says, they also completely got wrong the anti-Semitism witch hunt. They completely mismanaged that. And that, of course, was the fault of Corbyn, but it was also the fault of his straight leftist advisors, such as Andrew Murray and Seamus Milne. Okay, right. What time have we got? Coming up to 4 minutes. So I'm not going to speak faster, but I'm conscious of the time. So my impression is that the sort of economy, the sort of politics that George Galloway has in mind, and I think this is a reasonable description, is something like a war economy. It's war socialism, at least with the name. And what I'm thinking of isn't so much Krieg Socialismus of 1916 and the German High Command. I'm really thinking of the British economy in World War II and the home front that was run by the Labour Party, people like Morrison, people like Attlee, the Deputy Prime Minister, and a control and direction of the economy. Not an autarky, but something going along those lines. Now, George Workers' Party tells us that we're going to be nice to foreigners. And when it comes to mass migration, we should turn the telescope round. That's quite right. We should look at the causes of it. And it's clear what the causes are. It's called poverty. It's called lack of opportunity. It's also called knowing some English. But he basically promises that socialism led by the Workers' Party, or Britain led by the Workers' Party, would cooperate with that much famed bloc, the BRICS, and wouldn't exploit the third world and would lift the world up. This is naivety to the nth degree. The BRICS is a sort of invention. I can't remember the guy who put it all together and go, oh, that's a good name. But it was bollocks to begin with, and it's super bollocks now. It doesn't include Saudi Arabia in the list of the new BRICS. So Saudi Arabia, Prince MBS, he's going to cooperate in. Oh, rubbish, George! Don't talk nonsense. This is coming out with pie in the sky stuff. That's the reality of it. But the World War II stuff, I think that has a certain accuracy. Okay, let's get down in the last couple of minutes. Workers' Party is for freedom of speech. Absolutely, it says. No restrictions. I support that. But does it really mean it? From my memory, George Galloway voted for the Religious Hatred Act that was pushed through by Tony Blair. Does that mean that people can criticize the Quran, George? I'm at least wanting to question them on that. But if they mean what they say, that's laudatory. It goes hand in hand, and I think this is really the point, that this freedom of speech stuff really, though, isn't about freedom of speech. It's, to use a phrase, it's anti-wokery. That's the reality of it. And what George, he picks up on a reality. The Workers' Party manifesto is really against human resource departments. It's against bullying management that come along and said, you said the wrong word and we're going to send you on a course. Has people living in fear of stepping out of line when it comes to political correctness. That is something people experience. And it is right that we side with them in at least their freedom to use wrong words. That's better than having some management coming down like a ton of bricks on them. On the other hand, having said that, here's an interesting formulation. End the war between workers and managers, because managers are there just to manage. And this has got nothing to do with shareholders. They're greedy, multinationals that trade in. No, end the war between workers and managers. And I think what we have here, therefore, is a sort of World War II socialism that is based on the nation. And you have phrases throughout the manifesto of one class, one nation. So it reminds me, again, I don't know how accurate this is, but it reminds me of the sort of socialism, the national socialism of characters like Joseph Pilsudski in Poland. Okay, I'm not accusing George Galloway of just about taking up the armed struggle as Pilsudski and the right wing of the Polish Socialist Party did, but this was an affiliate of the Second International, but not a Marxist socialism. This was a socialism of the Second International that stood for the reunification of Poland, which meant breaking up Austria, Germany, and Russia at the time. And it was Luxembourg, Rosa Luxemburg and Lenin, for example, that said, no, that's a bit stupid nowadays. It might have been okay in the 19th century, something Marx supported, but now the working class in Russia, in the Russian Empire, has been integrated. We want the unity between Polish workers and Russian workers in one party, in one regime, when we come to power. But George, as I said, to me, is a one nationist sort of socialism. Okay. He also talks about bureau fascism. I haven't got a clue what bureau fascism is, but he proposes things like a ban on foreign ownership on the means of communication. I go, I don't know who owns Zoom, George, but I've got a suspicion that it might not be owned by a true Brit. When I Google Workers' Party, I think possibly that Google ain't a Brit company. I think possibly. When I read The Sun, I know it's owned by a foreigner. I know that. No, to me, this shows you the futility of national socialism. The futility of national socialism that, for example, raises the question, of withdrawing from NATO, but not abolishing the standing army, not having a people's militia, that calls, instead of actually supplying the army with American weapons, that what there should be is Brit weapons. I mean, are we really going to have a Brit Zoom, a Brit Google, or should we just take the lot? It seems to me we should be taking the lot. Okay, let's come to an end. Workers' Party, the only time it starts to deal with socialism, by the way, is when it comes to culture. And we're told that this won't be a dour socialist. So it'll be full of nice things, like Bangla music, or, have these takeaways. Racism, it won't have, because that was introduced apparently by American soldiers and American airmen in World War II, not us Brits. I mean, I should tell my gran that she was Irish but hid it. You didn't have signposts, did you, George, in pubs near you? I don't know what it was like in Dundee, but in London, in my memory, pubs that had niggers, no dogs, Irish, with Americans. I don't know. Either way, socialism is going to be not dual. And we're also given a program football. I'm in with football. Prices should be kept down. And what we're told in the section on football shows that it isn't just George Galloway. What you've actually got in terms of the Workers' Party manifesto is not the hand of one man or even the hand of one committee that's sitting it. You've got a number of different committees now, own particular recommendations. On, for example, football, the idea actually you cannot overcome financialization. That's only said in passing on the section on football. Nonetheless, I don't want to give the impression and that this is simply a critique of George Galloway. It's partially Galloway, but it's also a critique of the Workers' Party. A tight body got together with in order to stand 150 plus. I would miss it in the same way I would Tusk, which I think has got no future whatsoever. It can carry on, but clearly it's not going to become the Labour Party Mark II. I don't think the Workers' Party is just a party, but I dismiss it. It could get together, but its performance manifesto I and approach highly critical, yes, but no automatic failure sign over it in the short to medium term. Of course, it cannot deliver its program. That's it, Bob. Thank you.